Hello and welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Stephen Ryan.
And I'm Matthew Lucas, and we post a video every Friday. So if you want to follow our continuing horticultural adventures, hit subscribe.
And don't forget our Monday short. So if you've got a burning horticultural question you'd like to ask me, put it in the comments below. Tell me where you're from for context, and we will answer your question on a Monday.
The context today, Stephen, is it's raining.
Yes, and I'm getting seriously wet, but there you go.
You are. But what I'm also noticing behind me is this stunning deep red rhododendron.
It's beautiful. One of those lovely old-fashioned hybrids. I think it's a variety called Bibiana, believe it or not. I still remember some of my old rhododendron names. It is looking stunning with its fabulous dark burgundy red flowers.
But are we here to talk about those?
No, we're not. We're actually in the...
Teasing you.
Yes, in the Mount Dandenong Botanic Gardens, and we've come to have a look at a brand new garden, which is in fact a cloud forest garden, a collection of plants from the mountains of Far North Queensland.
Which is very exciting, and I can say that the weather is highly appropriate for those plants to feel at home.
Yes, there's a lot of cloud and rain going on today. Yeah.
But also, it must be, in a botanic garden context, one of the newest plantings, because it's literally 3 months old.
Well, exactly. So it's gone in only a few months ago, and so we're here right at the beginnings, which is sort of fun.
Fantastic. Let's go and find out.
All right, here we are up at the Mount Dandenong Botanic Gardens.
Yes.
On a reasonably cool and slightly drippy afternoon. And I'd like to introduce to you Andrew Rouse, who is a member of the Rhododendron Society, which still holds a position here in the gardens. And we've come to look at a really special and important garden that's just started.
Hello, Andrew.
Hello.
Good to meet you. Thanks for having us.
Pleasure. It's lovely to have you up here. Here we have growing plants collected from far north Queensland at the top of those high mountains to the north and south of Cairns.
Now, I'm going to drop a map in and show you exactly where we're talking about. So in relation to that habitat, which is a long way away from where we are, and I'll show you where we are.
Yes, which will make sense to people, perhaps, hopefully. The question then is, but why? You know, that's an important question, I guess.
The genesis of this project goes back to about 2012. We've had in cultivation here in Australia our two native rhododendrons for decades, but the provenance information for those past collections have been lost. So we were really keen to recollect our native rhodos.
And an aside, we've made a video with Andrew about Vireo rhododendrons, which we'll link.
So we're very keen to recollect those rhododendrons, but you need to do so under a Queensland permit.
Yeah.
So we forged a relationship with the Australian Tropical Herbarium, and then with funding from the Ian Potter Foundation here in Melbourne, we worked with the Australian Tropical Herbarium to go back to those mountains and recollect the rhododendrons.
All right. So that was sort of the major sort of thrust, I guess, of what you're doing. But you've brought everything back.
But hang on. Can I just ask, what condition did you find those rhododendrons when you were there? Firstly, were they there?
They were there. So the mountains in far north Queensland get up to sort of 1,200, 1,300 metres, and the rhodos are found about 1,000 metres up. And it's a very, very unusual climate. It's sort of where the trees start to get really small. It can range from intense sunshine to the clouds come in and it gets really cold, really wet. So it is that true tropical montane environment. So we found the rhodos mostly, almost without exception, growing on rocks, either right out in the open or in stunted forest.
Well, that's reassuring. They were still there. That's
still
the
there.
first thing, when you go looking for a species, that you find it.
Yeah, we found everywhere we went where we knew from herbarium records there were rhododendrons collected, we were able to re-find them.
You've been able to possibly put together a collection of provenanced rhododendrons of our two species from Australia that is unparalleled anywhere.
Pretty much. So we think this is possibly one of the strongest conservation collections. So we've got two species. We have one of those species, Rhododendron locki, from every known location. And the other one, Rhododendron variosum, from 9 of the 11 known locations.
Fantastic.
So it's a really solid conservation collection.
So let's now bring ourselves to here. I'm seeing lots of different plants. So how did this idea then morph into this garden? So the other species that were being collected?
So that came about because the first project was deemed to be so successful that one of the key donors, the Ian Potter Foundation, invited the Australian Tropical Herbarium to come back for a much larger project. which was to recollect all the other endemic plants found up on those mountaintops. And then so the subsequent 4 or 5 years was with a whole bunch of project partners going to those mountains and recollecting the native plants found just at the very top of those mountains.
Now, the question then comes is to why? Because are these plants under particular threat in the wild? Is there an issue that we're trying to, sort of museum collect these things?
Very much so, because one of the first bits of work that was done in the lead up to the first round of collecting was looking at the likely climate under climate change scenarios for those mountaintops, and understandably so, the results were pretty dire. So you could see that they found at just the very top of these mountains, and slightly hotter, slightly drier, nowhere to go.
Yeah. So they can't move up in altitude.
There is literally nowhere to go.
So again, the novice amongst us, that environment we're talking about, is that unique to Australia, those particular mountain tops, in terms of the climate and the speciation there?
Very much so. There isn't really anywhere else where you have, certainly not in the tropics. So these are mountains which hug the coast.
Yeah.
So anyone who's been to Cairns in Far North Queensland, they're literally flying in, you see them out the window. They're very close to the coast. They're very, very wet. The wet part of Queensland or tropical Queensland just hugs the coast, and that's where the high mountains are, and that's where these rhododendrons and the other montane plants are found.
So how similar is this environment here in Mount Dandenong, which is just to the northeast of Melbourne? How similar is the soil, the climate? I mean, how comfortable are these plants going to be?
So it's probably actually the best botanic gardens in Australia to grow those plants.
Right.
Because up in North Queensland, it's lots of sunshine, but the top of those mountains is quite cold. And down at Cairns, it's tropical. It's like Singapore. They simply will not grow down there. So it needed that Goldilocks environment, not too
hot,
cold,
not too dry,
and not too dry. So and these botanic gardens, bizarrely, some thousands of kilometres away, are probably the best place in Australia to grow them.
Well, lucky us. I think I read somewhere that is the Dandenong area one of the highest rainfall areas in mainland Australia, or in Victoria.
It's up there for Victoria.
Yeah.
So it's where I am in inner Melbourne. I'm at 600 millimetres. Up here is probably closer to 2,000, 1,500 to 2,000. A little bit cooler, a lot wetter, and importantly for rhododendrons, no hard frost anymore.
And of course, you've got an acidic soil naturally up here as well, which is
beautiful mountain soil. Yeah.
And there's a lot of commercial growers around here because the climate is so perfect. There's lots of flower growers, branch growers for the forestry industry, as well as commercial horticulturalists.
Yeah.
Now, we just arrived. It looks very new to me, Andrew. So when was it planted?
So this was only planted out a couple of months ago. So May was probably the planting, May, June. We're now in September. So it is a brand new garden.
Newest garden we visited.
Yes, it is.
Yep.
It would definitely take that.
I must say, I'll show everyone what I'm touching. Loving the hard landscaping. So who actually designed it?
So it's designed by Andrea Proctor, and it was wonderful to work with her and Parks Victoria, who manage these gardens, around with a very tight budget to try to get the look and feel of North Queensland. And one of the key things which I personally experienced, but also Andrea saw from photographs, was at the top of those mountains, huge granite boulders.
Right.
And rhodos and other endemic plants growing in amongst and on those boulders.
Well, we've seen, and we'll show people more closely, that you've kind of created some of those little micro moments with split rocks, with wood chips to sort of start to replicate that. So what do you think? When are we going to see this garden kind of come into itself? How long is it going to take? I mean, within reason.
Yeah, so I
Because
think
in a century, it'll be wonderful.
Yeah, no, I think within a year, the freshly planted plants, once they settle down and they just get into their rhythm, a year's time will look quite different. So in the area we're in at the moment is where most of the rhodos are, and orchids and various other things.
Yeah.
But interspersed amongst them are plants which will get quite a bit bigger. So I think in a year's time it'll look quite different, and then in a couple of years after that, very different again.
And I think the thing that you mentioned in the rhododendron video is that Vireo rhododendrons, different ones bloom at different times. So really, whenever you're walking through here, there's going to be something in bloom and something to interest you.
Yeah, so for our native rhodos for Melbourne, they tend to bloom in summer.
Ah, right.
broadly. So
Oh, of
both-
course, this
both
is
of
just
them-
the species in that area.
These are
right.
just those two species. They both bloom in summer. So summertime, you'll see both of them in flower here.
Unusual.
a bad thing.
I was going to say rhododendron in midsummer.
Yeah,
Midsummer,
because
yeah.
most of the garden here is very spring
Yeah,
oriented.
absolutely.
Because you've got those huge collections of Himalayan rhododendrons and hybrid rhododendrons, and of course magnolias and camellias and all those other things. So to have a major display of something in high summer, apart from hydrangeas, we don't have a lot else, do we?
No, not really. So I think these rhodos, and the other good thing about them is that they are reliable flowers. So once they hit their straps, they should be in flower every summer.
Good.
Well, I think, Stephen, we should go and have a wander around and find some specific
Yeah,
points
I
of
want to
interest.
look at some plants I've never seen before, because that's one of the things. I've not been to those mountains in far north Queensland. And even just walking in here, I was surprised at how many leaves I noticed of things that I am not familiar with. And so it's like a kid in a lolly shop when you put me in amongst some plants I've never seen before. So there you go.
Well, Andrew, thanks for your time and good luck with this garden. It's so exciting.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, Stephen, one of the things that really strikes me about this garden is this incredible hard landscaping. So these split rocks.
It's fantastic. I mean, I'm going to go home and split some myself, I think.
Well, I'm loving it too. Because
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't, but you could actually do this in a city garden if you had access to a large split rock. But,
Yes, exactly. Although you could go out to a quarry and get some rocks split, I suppose.
or just two rocks and leave them together. But anyway,
Yeah.
let's talk about what's going on here.
All right, so what they've done here is they've obviously cut the rock in half, made a decent sized gap. The gap has been filled with chunky pieces of wood chip, basically, by the looks of it. It's been covered by a metal grill so that it holds everything in place. And because the grill's black, you don't really notice it. They've also put irrigation through it so that they can keep moisture up to the plants they've put in it. And they've planted a range of interesting and weird northern Queensland mountain plants in the actual mix. So they've got Paphia, the blueberry from northern Queensland. It's got some little ferns, so there's a range of different ferns involved. There's some orchids that have been planted. So there's a whole range of sort of lithophytic types of plants growing in a particularly natural sort of environment.
And I must say, I mean, it's literally a few months old. This garden is going to look incredible in a few years' time when these things are settled in.
And it's a good way for people to visit Far North Queensland without visiting Far North Queensland as well.
Although that is a beautiful place to visit.
Yeah.
Let's go and see what else is going on.
All right.
So, Stephen, more cunning rock work.
Yes, this one's had a whole board out of the middle of it, and they've put in what looks like a mixture of wood chips and gravel inside the hole, and a rhododendron viriosum has been planted, and another one of my favourite Paphias has been put in as well. And so it's a really interesting concept. So it's growing as the lithophyte that it probably is.
And in our earlier video about Virea rhododendrons, Andrew made the point that they often grow on the rock, but their roots go down the outside into the soil. So creating this sort of version of that climate or that condition is extraordinary. I'd love a drilled rock.
Yeah.
I'm getting.
You know you can get them, but they are very expensive to get done, unfortunately.
I'm having hard landscaping envy.
Yes, well, so am I. I'd love some of this myself.
Well, suddenly, Stephen, it's raining, which is appropriate for a cloud forest.
Well, it is rather, and we're standing in front of a huge drift of our native rhododendrons.
Won't this be incredible in summer to come and see a bank of... They're both red, aren't they?
Oh yes, they're all a bright scarlet red with quite long tubular flowers
Yeah.
on them, and they will look stunning.
And to Andrew's point, rhododendrons in midsummer in Australia.
Yeah.
What a sight to behold this will
It's
be.
going to be fantastic.
It will. We'll see you here in 2 years.
Yeah. All right, I just have a passion for anything with great foliage, and this is another plant I've never come across before, Pullia stutzeri. It's in the Canoniaceae family, and again, it'll have fantastic foliage. It could actually have flowers of some merit because Canoniaceae often has nice fluffy flower clusters, so it might have attractive flowers. And it has the classical form that these plants have with the flattened stipules, the little sort of leafy bits that form around the growth tips. So Pullia stutzeri, and I think it's a fabulous looking thing.
Well, Stephen, one of the things that's made my heart sing is this Dendrobium speciosum. What an amazing plant coming into bud, but in its own rock pot.
Yes, exactly. And of course, we need to make it quite plain that this isn't a plant from, in fact, the mountains of far north Queensland. So there are a few things that are in here that will probably be moved out later on once things start to sort of
So Andrew was telling us off camera there were amazing orchids, but different species up there in the mountains. So it'll be great to see. But I just love the way that this one has been planted. I have severe orchid envy.
Oh, there you go. Now, one thing I didn't expect to see in this garden, considering it's far north Queensland rainforest plants or cloud forest plants, is a Banksia. And this is Banksia aquilinea. And apparently it's one of the host plants under which some of the rhododendrons would grow. So although we haven't got a bloom on it, we're under the maybe illusion that the plant looks somewhat similar to our southern Banksias with its candle-like flowers in a yellowy orangey shade. So the leaves are quite narrow. I'm assuming that the yellow foliage down at the bottom part is a little bit of stress as it's trying to get itself established. That may not be a characteristic of the plant long term, but it's got very pleasant foliage and I think it might have some garden potential.
Well, Stephen, this must be one of the newest gardens we've ever visited.
Well, and I don't think it could be much newer than this and be existing.
I'm excited though, because you know, for someone who's about to plant a garden himself.
Yeah.
Now, I think this end, Andrew pointed out, was where most of the trees are.
All right, well, I just spotted something that I'm particularly fond of, and that's one of our agathis, the Kauri pines.
Well, let's go and have a look.
All right.
Stephen, I feel we have visited the Queensland
Kauri.
Kauris again.
Yes, this is Agathis robusta, which is the more typical form that you see around in horticulture of the 3 species of agathis that we have here in Australia.
So this was planted in May.
Yeah.
How long are we looking at before that starts taking on some?
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised.
Really?
They can grow comparatively quickly.
Oh.
You give this thing 10 years and you'll be able to swing a hammock from it.
Okay, put that in writing. Let's come back and have a look.
So
at
they
10
do
years.
grow quite fast, and of course they are a forest giant. We saw a couple of big ones in the Melbourne Botanic Gardens that
Indeed.
were probably 120 years old, with trunks on them, meters wide.
An amazing bark.
Oh, beautiful bark! Yes,
Yeah.
I always look forward to seeing the big ones.
There we go. Well, we are blessing this tree. In a century, people will be standing under it going, what an amazing tree.
Yes, exactly.
Now, there's something very curious over there I
Yeah.
want us to go and have a look at.
All right, let's go in that direction, shall we? Now, a plant that I wasn't familiar with regards to coming from this part of Australia is Tasmania. Now, most of us are familiar with the mountain pepper bush, at least those of us in Australia, because it's become a bush tucker plant, and so it's used as a condiment. This one that's come from the mountains of northern Queensland, I think, is going to be a fantastic garden plant. If you look at it closely, it's got fabulous red stems. The new growth comes up wonderful and coppery looking. I'm assuming its flowers will be small and whitish or greenish, as this genus tends to do. And just maybe we'll have a tropical condiment once we've got it growing in our garden. It would look to me, as a plant from where it comes from, that this plant could in fact be a little cold sensitive, so I wouldn't necessarily try and grow it anywhere where you get any amount of frost. It's certainly not going to be as cold hardy as the southern Victorian and Tasmanian species, but it will probably cope with higher humidity. It might well cope with more direct sunlight, and I just think it could be a really nice garden plant. So it's wonderful to meet it. So at this stage, these plants, which there's a lovely colony of them here in the gardens, labelled as Tasmania sp. In other words, an unnamed as yet species, or at least hasn't been formally designated with a species name. I think I would like some cuttings. And here it's going to be in a spot where it's going to get sun from early morning right into late afternoon, so it'll be interesting to see how it manages in a fully open aspect, albeit up in the Dandenong Ranges. Well, this has to be a highlight plant. It's certainly something I've never seen before. This is called Litzia granitica, and just looking at this plant, I see it as having enormous horticultural potential. Its big, tropical-looking leaves are fabulous, yet they're firm and hard. It's making a nice, compact plant. I can see it probably growing into a substantial tree given enough time, but I don't care, I want one. I think it's a fabulous plant, and it looks to be the only one in the garden here at this stage, so I'm hoping that the Rhododendron Society members get to work and propagate up a nice batch of it, because it's beautiful. This will probably only really be a foliage plant because most of the plants in this genus tend to have comparatively inconspicuous flowers, but really, who cares? It's just got such fabulous foliage.
Well, Stephen, how wonderful it has been to see the newest of Australia's botanic gardens, really.
Well, it is really, and to come into a place like this and be exposed to a selection of plants that are new to me is always exciting.
I can see your little eyes glistening and that lust for a cutting, but they're too small, Stephen.
Yeah, and possibly not lusting for cutting so much because some of these plants might be difficult for me to grow at Macedon.
True.
But there's nothing wrong with seeing them.
Not at all. Well, we need to thank Andrew for his time.
Yes, and of course we need to thank Parks Victoria for allowing us access here. And it's fabulous to see that the what was the old Rhododendron Gardens is still being looked after really beautifully as the Mount Dandenong Botanic Garden.
Absolutely. And this is the garden behind us. So in a few years' time, it's going to look sensational.
Yeah, gives us something to come back for.
Yes, it's a cloud forest. It's cloudy. It's raining. And if you want to know what we're going to do next week, you'll have to hit subscribe.
And don't forget our Monday Shorts. So if you've got a question that you'd like to ask me, put it in the comments below. Tell me where you're from so that I've got context and we'll answer it on our Monday Shorts.
We will indeed. But until then, we are going to go and get a warm cup of tea out of the rain and look forward to seeing you next week.
All right. Bye all.